It's Michelle Savage with XBRL US, and you are here for our webinar, Tools and Techniques for the Data Pipeline, Updates from XBRL US. We're very excited to have with us today the XBRL US team. Campbell Pride is our President and CEO, David Torriello, our VP of Operations, and Mark Ward is our Applications Administrator. As you can see on your screen here, we're going to be covering a number of different topics today. First, we're going to talk about some updates on XBRL filed data. We'll talk about the XBRL API, the public filings database, and the data community, and then we'll talk about what's coming up next. We will take questions at the end. However, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A chat that you see on the screen so that we can gather those questions and be sure to respond to them at the end. If you do have any kind of technical difficulties accessing the audio or the video, please send us an email at support, SUPPORT, @xbrl.us, and we'll do our best to get you back online. Thanks very much and for joining us again. And I'm going to first turn it over to Mark Ward. Mark.
Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and go over a few updates that we have to the add-on and the API. Since the last time that since we had this particular, this kind of update, we've added a few new features. And give me a second. Let me share my screen. We've added a few new features, and these changes are exposed through the add-on, which I am pulling up right now. For the first thing that we've done is we've unified the code base. We've made the UI a form and function in both the Google and the Excel version look and act the same. On the left-hand side of my screen, you can see the Google version, and on the right-hand side, you can see the Excel. And they both look and act pretty much the same. For example, I can look for the recent the facts for the latest Apple 10Q and receive it there, and I can do this exact same thing over here in the Google version as well. Actually, the only difference between the two is how the functions that these add-ons expose. They both expose one called show data and show SQL. The show data is shown up as just plain show data in the Google version, and since it needs to need a namespace, it's xbrl.showdata in the Excel version. The next change that we made has to do with the dropdowns. We've made dynamic dropdowns that basically change the contents of one field based on the other. For example, we have the sources that are accessible, and you can see we have the SEC in both the SEC and the FERC, and one of the fields that depends on that is document type. Now that I've selected all, you can see that there's both SEC and FERC, the FERC Form 1, and if I change the source, the form types change as well. Another example of this would be the entities that are shown up. If you choose SEC, only the SEC filings will show, and likewise, same thing for the FERC. There's another example would be down here underneath the concepts. Basically, with the concepts, you can see that this shows pretty much all the a large number of the concepts that are available. But if I go back to our Apple example and choose a particular now I'm going to have to use a DTS rather than the report name, and excuse me for a second here. And if I choose it by DTS, I can and then look for the same ones. We can now see that that it's not only is it filtering it by the input that I gave, but also by the filing that I selected. Now that leads into another change that that we made, which allows you to print out the contents of the drop downs. You may have seen when I've typed in some of the information, that this icon that is now showing up, and these basically show up in the drop down fields. And what it'll allow you to do, like in this case, like I said before, we have a very extremely long list, and you may want to be able to search for that differently, or scroll down a lot, go through them a lot faster, or you may actually be interested in the information that's right there and want to get that onto the sheet. So once you pull up the drop down, if you click on this right here, it'll go ahead and copy it onto the into the sheet itself. So that's what I have to cover, and Campbell will go ahead and continue with the next few features.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So I'm just going to walk through I'm going to share my screen here. And we're going to go through the first feature we're going to talk about is something we added to help folks basically understand what the API is doing. So I've just got a query that I've set up here, for example, on the right-hand side. And this is using a new function we have called Cube, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And I basically pulled this data, and what this data is pulling is it's pulling information for a schedule, it's pulling from a REIT, it's pulling all the real estate information about the accumulated depreciation, what the value was originally, what the new value is. So you can pull this data from the schedule. But one of the things you may want to do is if you wanted to understand what's going on in the background, and this is particularly for data users, if you want, you can get access directly to our database, so you can run SQL queries. A lot of folks had asked us, oh, I want to reproduce what's happening in the API in the underlying database. So we've added an extra button on here. You can get the data back. You can get the data back without the function. You can get the actual API call, and we've added something called SQL. So if you put SQL in here, what this does, and you return it actually returns the actual SQL query. So then you can copy and paste this SQL query into something like pgadmin, and I just pasted it in here. And then you can run this query directly against the database. But it helps you understand what's going on in the database. So this query comes back, and then this should match exactly the data that would come back if we ran the query through the API. So what the SQL is doing is just basically giving you insight into how this data is actually being queried against the database. So if you're interested in getting direct database access and you're pulling data through the API, you can do that through the SQL. And once again, if this is useful for power users, if you want to get more into the detail of the data, let's say you want the database to be able to do group bys and other types of function at the database level for things you can't get through the API. This is really to help people be able to do that and understand the database, the underlying database structure. So that's the first component, which is the SQL database, and that function is here. You can see on the slides that will go out and basically give you an example of how you can do that. The next thing we've added is something called unique, and then you can see this. I'm just going to go to another example. So let's do an example of this. So let's say I want to get a report. So I'm going to get report information. I'm going to get rid of these. As Mark mentioned, these 10 Qs, I'm going to get rid of all of this. let's say I wanted to know where are all the sources of all the data that we have. At the moment, we have a drop down with SEC and FERC. We actually have more data in the database. It's just hasn't been updated on here yet, but we also have the ESEF data. Now, if I went and said, give me a copy of all the report, I could then do this query now. And if I go and query it, it's going to give me all the data for every single report that's ever been reported. But what I can do is I got this unique function, and then I can drill down on that, and I can say, oh, I want to know what was the source name, or what were the document types that have been filed. I can do this with the unique function. So let's say source name, for example. Spell it right. So this will come up source name, for example. And then if I get this, what this is going to do, this function goes off and it goes through all the reports and it returns to me, I've got ESEF, I've got FERC, and I've got SEC in the database. So it basically gives you a way to be able to do a group by actually through the API, and then I could change this. And let's say I wanted to say something else. I haven't run this, but this may take a little bit of time to run. But let's say I wanted to get the, what were all the document types, for example. I could do that as well. So this would return what is a list of all the I've never run this before. Let's see what happens. It might take a little bit of time, but it goes through, and these are all the document types that we have in the database. So you can see all these. So there's a lot of different documents that have been filed to date, right? And then you could put another category on here as well. Let's say you wanted to have the source name, so you wanted to know where they came from. So this unique is going to go on both of these now. So this list may get a little bit longer, but you can do that. So you can kind of do a join by query. So you can see form 1 is FERC. These are all the different forms that are filed by the SEC. These are the FERC ones, for example. We may even have some of the ESEF ones in here as well. So we've got something called, these are ESEF annual report, half-year report. So you can kind of get data on some of these document types. So the unique basically can be used on any function. And what it does is it just does a group by, it basically collapses everything into a set of unique set of records. So that can be kind of useful because you can get the data back quickly. If you were to do this without the unique, you'd have to get a list back of every single report, and that query would take a long time to run. So that function's been added, so that can be very useful if you want to get high level information. Okay. So there are a couple of additional endpoints that we've added. We've added something called cube, and we've added something called cube dimensions. So what these do, and this has come particularly out of what's happened with a lot of the work that's been done with the FERC, is that these schedules are fixed in nature, right? So, and people have said, I want to get everything I want to get all the information that's on the balance sheet for a company. And in the past, if you had to do that, you'd have to go say, well, what are all the elements on the balance sheet? Then we go and find those, and then we write a query to pull back all the facts for the balance sheet. So it was really, a little bit painful. So we said, it'd be nice if you could just say, hey, give me everything that's on a given schedule. So this will work for both SEC data and also for FERC data. So just to show you how that would work. So we have an endpoint here called cube. Let's just do FERC. We'll do a FERC one and an SEC one. So like FERC, let's say Marin, Illinois, for example. All right, so let's just do this is their quarterly filing, which was just recently filed. And then it says select the group or schedule of the table, right? So then if you bring this up, you can then just search on here what item you want. So let's say I want the balance sheet, for example. We have something in here called enter accuracy index. Now, what this does is sometimes, particularly with inline filings, the same value can be reported on a filing multiple times. So, and if they're separate facts, it's going to bring each of those facts back. So this allows you just to, if you put 1 on here, this is basically going to bring you back the most accurate facts. So then you only get 1. For FERC filings, you don't really need it. It doesn't really come up, but it's available there. And for SEC filings, it is, because sometimes you may have the same fact like 4 times in the document. They've reported it 4 different times because it's in different locations and maybe has slightly different unit, a slightly different decimal. So that just allows you to get the most accurate one. So if I do get on this, what this is going to bring back is this is going to bring back everything that was on that schedule, all the values that were on that schedule. So you kind of get like just a nice set of them. It brings back the tree sequence, so you can, if you want to sort them and what order they would appear, then you can do that as well. That's provided as a standard field on here, so you can get that. So when this comes back, it's going to give me the order that it appears, and this is the order that it'll appear on the schedule. Here's utility plant. I've got 22, 2021. So it's a way to limit it. So if you want to get the data on any schedule on FERC, you can do that. But as I was saying before, the other example, let's say I've got a REIT and I want to get back everything. For those who aren't familiar with REIT reporting, they've got to report the schedule of all their, of all the properties that they own. And a lot of people are very interested in that because particularly people who are doing valuation work. So if you want to get all of that data, you can get that as well. So I was just going to bring up a REIT. Let's say American Healthcare is a REIT. It's going to bring me back, and that's reported in the 10K. So here's the 10K for that. And then we don't want that group, we want a different group. This just gives me a list of these are all of the cubes that they have. Now cubes is basically, it's only when they're dimensionalized it, but these are dimensionalized. So then you can see here's the schedule, here's schedule of real estate, disclosure schedule 3 real estate. I can click on that. And so that's going to bring me, now when I query that, it's going to bring me back. It's going to bring me back all that data that was on that schedule for that REIT. And this can be really, really useful because to try and pull this data, particularly in this case, the company's gone and created extensions, which they shouldn't have done, but they did. But then at least you can pull this data and you can see what they reported on the schedule. Now, a lot of, and I know a lot of accounting firms, they get this data. So, and this can take them months to go and pull. So this should make this significantly easier for people who want to look at REIT information. The other thing we've included in here, just delete this, is something. So this is Cube. So what Cube does is it gives you all the facts in a cube or in a schedule. So you think of Cube as like a schedule, but we also have something called Cube Dimensions. And what this really is just really saying, give me the information that is in a cube. Tell me what is the dimensional information that we have. So let's do an example. So use Apple as an example. And let's look at the 10K. Now, so a classic cube that everyone does, or a classic schedule, which always has dimensions on it, is like the statement of shareholders' equity. So if we look that up, just to show you how this works. So they did one for the consolidated of operations, but look, they've got shareholders' equity here. So if I click this, what this will tell me, and I'm saying, give me the dimension, give me the members, give me the table name. So this is going to tell me what were the things that they had put on the dimension. So you can see here, and we can sort it as well, just to make it a bit easier. So what's coming back here is they've got the statement of equity components axes. And on that, they have the equity component domain, they have common stock, including additional paid-in capital, they have retained earnings, and they have accumulated the comprehensive income. They also have on that same table, have the cumulative effect of adoption. So they have an adjustment that's also on that schedule. Now, this is telling you about that, giving you all the dimensions on it. And this can be really useful if you want to know, okay, what are all the possible, if I'm looking at this data, what are all the possible dimensions that could be included in this table? So then at least you can go and look that up, and then you can use that in your queries. And we're using this so that we can say, if you've got some data, we can use this query to basically pull information about the cube, and then we know what's on it. So if you've got data for FERC, okay, I want to know what the dimension is this table uses, and what are the, how has it been broken down, and what was the table name, I can use it. For SEC, people are not guaranteed to use these, but for ESEF reporting and for FERC reporting, whenever data is reported, it's got to be reported in an XBRL hypercube. So this information we think is valuable for people when you're looking at this data. So we're giving you a way to be able to access it. All right, and I think I've gone through these examples in the slides. We've got an example using REITs. I think it's a different, we've got a different example here. This is Duke Energy. And then the cube dimensions, which we went through. So it just gives you the ability to look those up. You can see the data, and it should make your queries a lot easier with both the unique function, the SQL, you can see what's going on, and then you can get a much better view into how the data was organized in the company's filing. Do you have any questions on those 4 slides? All right. So I'll hand it back to you, David. I'm going to stop sharing.
Great. Thanks, Campbell. Let me just bring my screen up. We'll step through a couple of other options in the XBRL file data add-ons, the extensions for Google Sheets and for Excel. Mine's also showing Excel. I'm on the Validate tab. That's the other side of the house. We have a query. Both Mark and Campbell kind of took you through what's new on that side of it. On this side, we're doing a couple of different things. In addition to the DQC rule sets and the DQC and SEC filer rule sets, we've also now added validations for FERC filers. So if you are involved in submitting to the eForms system, the e-collection platform, you can validate your filings here in Excel prior to submitting them to FERC. I know they also have a test service that they encourage filers to use before they can actually submit their filings. These are the same validations that are running here off of the desktop. So if you don't want to log in, you just want to run it, just fire up your XBRL file data add-on. Come over to the validate side and fire away. You simply load up a filing. I won't step through it. You load up a filing, use the FERC validations, check the filing, and then it drops down into whatever cell you happen to be on in your spreadsheet. Same is true for something called ESEF. ESEF is the European Single Electronic Format. It's an annual report required by ESMA, the European Securities and Markets Authority. And again, anyone who has an account with us that's not a Gmail or a Hotmail account, but a company account, or anyone who is a member of XBRL US is able to use these checks in order to find out a little bit more about the data quality for these filings. The FERC filings, the FERC validations, excuse me, are published by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We grab a set of those validations and we run our own service for them. For the ESEF filings, those are developed by the Data Quality Committee, the same Data Quality Committee that's been working on SEC submissions. Since the ESEF filings involve the IFRS taxonomy, we have a good base of experience, a base of knowledge, and some members who've just done some fantastic work to help us understand some of the nuances of filing with the IFRS taxonomy in order to develop some strong rules for data quality in ESEF filings as that comes into view in the next couple of years. So that's the validation side. Just to flip back to the data side of things, inside of the tool itself, the add-on, if you're using Google or if you're using the Excel add-on, there are a couple of buttons that you may overlook from time to time. They're pretty significant. This first one, browse documentation. Hopefully you can see the flyover that reminds you that this is where you can go to find out about the API that underpins this add-on. We've done a lot, I think, to expose some of the most common facets of the API, some of the parameters that you can use to search for data, it's by no means exhaustive. If we were to design a task pane that included everything, it would probably extend 3 or 4 times what it currently does. So for the sake of not scrolling, we've put the most common requests into these wizards. It still is a pretty lengthy wizard. The good thing about it is that if you go and get data, it drops down into your spreadsheet and you can then start managing it. And if you use the documentation along with the, I'm going to try to draw this down here, along with the formula bar itself, you can modify these and draw in additional fields if you don't want to go back and re-poll or re-query with that, or change up the mix of filters that you're using to pull back the data. I only say that's just so that you get familiar with looking at this page, kind of lengthy in and of itself, but this is it. This is the comprehensive documentation for the API. It's been updated recently. There's a section in it that was missing a number of fields that are available. This is the document endpoint. We don't even show this on the Excel or the Google Sheet extension, but you can grab the entire document, not only the XBRL portions of the document, but the full document. When we download from the SEC or from FERC, we're taking in everything. We make a copy of it, and then we make it available. So there are some nice functionalities that you can use to search for specific text. Those of you that are SEC filer members and are using tools for SEC filers, that's the web-based platform that we also have available. That uses this very same search if you're searching an entire document. Here it's in the API, so you can get it in Excel. It takes a little bit of work, so we don't provide any kind of a interface for it on the front end, but know that it's there. If it's something where you're looking for specific terms or specific phrases, it could come in very handy. I say that because at the bottom, we've updated this list of fields to return so that you have a full appreciation for the detail that you can pull out from the document and from the endpoint for the filings that that we've collected from the SEC and from the FERC, and as Campbell alluded to, other sources as well. We just haven't exposed them at this point. So a little bit about validations, a little bit about additional fields in the documentation. We've also updated our documentation for the database. There are a number of folks who are power users and organizational users who have SQL access. Campbell showed you the functionality where you could print out the SQL statement that returns the query results in the API. But you can go right against the database if you have a username and password. If you need a username and password, go to the database section of our site. There's a really quick form to fill out, direct access with SQL. Tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll look you up in our system. We'll issue credentials, or we'll come back to you and explain to you why we can't issue you credentials. The database itself, the documentation has been updated. We've got a brand new ERD, entity relationship diagram, kind of big because the database itself has grown pretty significantly. So we put in some time and effort to help you understand a little bit more about the relationships throughout the database. For those of you that are using the database, I encourage you to get familiar with this because it can open up your eyes to all of the possibilities that are available to you. Members, I also encourage you to reach out if you're having trouble finding data, because we can jump in and try to help you at least get closer to where you need to be in terms of getting data. I think the SQL query in the add-in is a huge step forward because it will let users with some very basic skills begin to appreciate what's available in the database. Moving right along, our XBRL data community is like the central hub for all things XBRL API. If you have not visited recently, I encourage you to come back, grab some of the templates, especially if you haven't been here for 6 or 8 months. We've streamlined the presentation here, I think, and drawn down some of the older templates that really worked with version 1 of the Google Sheet add-on. Now that we have an interface that you can use to build queries up, it didn't make sense to leave that early version on. We've taken a couple other templates down, and we've made it so that the templates that we do have that are still available to you are available in both flavors, the Excel file or the Google Sheet link. And I just encourage you, when you come and start using the Google Sheet link, that you make a copy. It's not going to work unless you make a copy. You're not able to run the add-on against the default file that's there. So make sure you make a copy. For Excel users, you'll download the file. It'll be yours at the beginning. Just a reminder, to use Excel, you're going to need OAuth 2 access, and that link is here on our page as well. Oh, there it is. Just in the blue button, OAuth 2 access. You come here, fill out the form, we get back to you in a couple of days, and away you go. You get a client ID and a secret pair that you need in order to log in to Excel. Last but not least, in addition to consolidating some of the templates that we had posted, we've also added a new one for a case study that was done by Christine Cheng. She and a fellow colleague at Ole Miss University made a presentation, Data Analytics Summer Workshop, sponsored by the AAA. She gave us, oh, it's gone. No, it's there. Sorry. She gave us her interest in finding data in our public filings database. We spun up a simple query, put it into Python. This is a kind of Python code that you're looking at. Runs in a Jupyter file. You fill out your details, you get access to it. We'll try to restart it. You get access to it, and then away you go. You simply run the cells. Yep, I guess it's not going to restart. You run the cells, and then you come down here, and you would run this cell as well. And at the bottom of the page, it prints out the results. Nice thing about this one is that when we did it, because Christine's data set was so large, we needed to iterate through the query and return all possible results from the database. So where you're limited in using the Excel platform or the Google Sheet platform, and you need to manually develop an iteration scheme, here the process will run and will return all data that's available to you. So again, just some of the things we've done to enhance the availability of the data by building out templates that are good for users on the desktop, good for users who are developing programs, and bringing you documentation that helps you to understand a little bit more about the complexity and the granularity of XBRL data. Michelle, I'm going to hand it back to you. Michelle. Yep.
Great, thanks very much. I'm sorry, I was working on getting my my mute off there. So thanks very much. I just want to cover a couple of additional slides, so bear with me a second. Oh, here we go. David, thank you for pointing this out.
Yeah, I got you. Sorry.
So, you know, you've heard a lot about some interesting new developments that we've made with the API, with the database. with various initiatives that we have ongoing, but there's still more to come. So I want to talk a little bit about what's coming next from our IT group here. The first, we've been hard at work on developing normalized views of balance sheet and income statement data. So when you look at XBRL data today, it is very much in a very granular, as reported form. We're working on developing some normalized, standardized data from that as reported data that will allow users to pull in full balance sheet income statements much easier than they are today. This is going to be available as an add-on for members at the power user level and above, and it will of course include all organizational members as well. Secondly, as David had mentioned, we are adding ESEP data to the public filings database. That's in process right now and will be available very soon. We're also looking at dimensional data, kind of reimagined for spreadsheets. So that's another initiative that's coming soon. And last, we are looking at developing a taxonomy viewer add-on for Excel and Google Sheets. So these are some new programs coming up, and we're always open to suggestions from our members and from others about, what do you think is the next direction for some of the applications that we're making available. So I think we're open for questions now, if we just want to flip to the next slide. And so, again, if you have questions, please click on the Q&A link that you see on your screen, and you can post your question there. And I'm going to take the first question we have here, which is, can you clarify the difference, this is a good question, between the SEC EDGAR API versus the XBRL API? The question goes on to say, if we want to work with one source, say just use the XBRL API, can we do everything with the XBRL API that we could do with the SEC EDGAR API? That was put out in November 2021. So Campbell, do you want to address that question?
Sure. And it's been a while since I looked at the SEC API, and I assume it hasn't been updated, but I've been tracking it that closely. But one of the differences is we try to make all the data available from the that was all of the information that is in the filing. We try to make that available through the API. Everything about the taxonomy, everything about the facts, everything about what networks we use, everything about the documents. So, and we make that information, and you should be able to get it. So anything, generally anything that was in the filing, you should be able to get through the XBRL API. The SEC API is from what I recall, is really focused on getting the fact information, and it's kind of quite rigid. You can't really control that much what you get back. You kind of get what the SEC's decided they should give you. One of the advantages of that API is, so let's say if you went and got, and because they've kind of they're pretty optimized it for that one thing. If you were to go to the SEC, this one thing I noticed about the SEC API is, if you said, give me all the assets for every single company that's ever been reported, then that API can return that data, and it can be a large volume, and it'll report it relatively quickly, and it won't limit it. Whereas if you did that on ours, you can query assets across, but we're going to go and give you all the dimensional data and give you everything about assets. So we kind of limit it, because in theory, what we're going to give back to you is probably going to be a lot more voluminous. And as a result, it's not quite going to be as quick. Whereas if you wanted to do broad searches across elements, across all years for all companies, the SEC API would be slightly faster. It would be faster at delivering that data, but it kind of gives you a limited set of queries. So that's kind of the difference at a very high level.
Campbell, thanks very much. We have another question. Is the taxonomy viewer functionality mentioned in the next steps in the next step slide meant only for XBRL US members, or will it be available for general public? Campbell, do you want to address that question?
Sure. I don't know if we made it. We assumed it would be available for everyone, and then that would, and the difference on this taxonomy viewer, just so you're aware of this, is, there is a taxonomy viewer that you can go and look at for FASB and for taxonomy, and even ESEP. There's also taxonomies that are hosted for that on like the Bigfoot site, so you can see the IFRS taxonomy. The intention of this is really, it's a taxonomy, so you can you can view any taxonomy. Effectively, whenever a company creates a filing, they've created their own taxonomy. So this viewer is intended to, so you can actually look at not only the standard taxonomies, but you can look at, you know, individual company taxonomies as well. And the intention at the moment is to include those, and we're thinking about trying to include that in the Excel add-in. You kind of can create a tax with the API that's there now. You can kind of create a rudimentary taxonomy viewer in Excel Sheets if you wanted, or Google Sheets, but we want to make that a little bit, you know, easier to view. But so the intention at the moment is that would be available for anyone to use.
Great, thanks, Campbell. Okay, the next question, and Mark, maybe you could address this question. Does the ESEF data contain quarterly report information or annual level data only?
Let's see, the ESEF, yeah, it includes everything that's basically reported to us. So we're basically focusing on the half year and full year. I believe the quarterly might be, Campbell, correct me if you think it's different. I think that's indicated as a half year.
Yeah, so there is no quarterly data generally reported for ESEF. So usually they'll put there'll be an annual filing, and in some cases a half year filing. If they did do a quarterly filing, which I don't think there's anything to prevent them, I haven't really seen any. But if they were to do one, we would bring that in as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you both. Okay, any other questions from the audience? Because those are the only ones that we've received in our Q&A link here.
Just one thing to mention, Michelle, I don't know if we're clear on this, but like the add-in is available for both Google, and David kind of mentioned it, and also for Excel, but we've done a lot of work to make sure that they're identical. So if you're using the Google add-in or through Google Sheets, or if you're using it through Excel, they are pretty much exactly the same. So slight differences. So if you've used Excel in the past and you want to switch to Google Sheets, there's really no real downside from the XBRL API perspective from moving from one, or if you're going to go Google Sheets to Excel, there's no real difference between them. The only probably difference is that in Excel, there's a limit to the size in the cell, which Google Sheets doesn't have. So that means you'll see on some of these formulas in the Excel, you'll see a concatenate, which basically concatenates, you know, if your query string's too long, whereas Google Sheets doesn't have that. So generally, you should be able to copy things between them. So if you were to switch from one to the other, it should be a lot more seamless than it was in the past.
Okay, the next question, I think I'll address this one to David. David, how can we find the database map that you presented?
Sure, thanks, Michelle. So on the right-hand side of the navigation on the XBRL US site, there is a button called Using Data. That first option under Using Data is called Database of Public Filings. When you visit that page, there's a protected page called XBRL US Database Documentation. I'll send along to the person who wrote the question. I'll make sure you get the details that you need to get access to that page as a member.
Great, thanks, David.
Yep.
The next question, Campbell, maybe you can address this one. The question is, why a cube? Maybe you could give some further clarification on the term cube and why that's why you're using that in the.
All right. So cube. The word cube really reflects the word hypercube, which is kind of an XBRL term, but in general, what that means is if you're thinking of a document, it just really means, hey, I've got some data and I'm disaggregating it. So anywhere where I've got something like assets, and let's say I broke assets up into different business segments, or I broke it up into different legal entities that I'm reporting for, whenever any of this information is disaggregated, which is very, very common in many filings. I've got, this the statement of shareholders' equity is another one which is disaggregated. Whenever this data is broken up over different dimensions, then we call that a cube. And when someone reports that data in XBRL, they've got to report it. In SEC filings, they call it a table. Like in ESEF, they call it hypercubes, but it's all the same idea. It's basically, if I've got information and it's in a schedule, and they've broken it up using a dimension, it's got to be in one of these things called a cube. So we introduced this particularly because ESEF filings and also FERC filings, all of this data is reported in a cube. So it kind of just gives you a convenient container where you can say, hey, go and give me all the information, which is basically sitting in this table or sitting in this schedule or sitting in this cube, all these words like synonyms for each other, so that you can go and get that data. Rather than getting it, you can get it as a whole block. Whereas prior to putting this in, you would have to go and look at the schedule. What are all the elements in that schedule? Okay, I want to go and pull all the facts for all of these elements, and then pull them together. So it's just a convenient grouping or container so that you can get all this information and just save real time in terms of pulling data using the API.
Great. Here's another question for David. Is the database map only available to members?
Yeah, sorry, Michelle. Yes, it's a benefit of membership. Our power users and organizational members can request access to the documentation.
Great, thank you. And there were some general questions about support for building apps designed to make API calls to the XBRL data. And I think that's something that we may want to address those directly with those individuals. So, there's, I don't know, David, if you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, sure. We, in addition to making the data available in limited or unlimited quantities, depending on whether or not you have a membership with us, we're also available to help you understand a little bit more about the API, a little bit more about how to use the add-ons, and a little bit more about how to manipulate some of the resources that we've made freely available at this point. For example, if you have a Python developer, I would turn them loose on the Jupyter notebooks. It's a Python script that will run any query that you want to run. If you have need for multiple queries, you can certainly have your developer build out a set of scripts that would draw down the data from our database. We're happy to try to jump in and at least help you get to a foothold understanding of it. If you need more, we're happy to work with you on a proposal for that as well.
Great. I think that the last question we have is really kind of a comment from someone saying normalized versions of all primary statements like the P&L, the balance sheet, cash flow, changes in equity would be of interest. So glad to hear that, because that's something that we've been working on. So, keep us in mind, and that's something that's going to be coming soon. We have a lot going on. We have a lot coming down the pike, and we're excited about all the things that XBRL can do for people. So I think that's it for questions. I want to thank Campbell and Mark and David for the presentation today, and thank you all for joining us. And we'll have more of these sessions going forward, but please do, take a look at the API, take a look at the templates. There's a lot right there right now, and we'd love to have you join the data community.